Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Global Nomads Podcast. Today we have Alexandra Liebrecht. She is a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. She is the owner of ProCanada Consulting Services, and she is just generally passionate about helping people. Alexandra, welcome.
Thank you so much, Samir, for having me.
I think what we're going to talk about is very important because we are dedicating this podcast to immigrants. And of course, the biggest challenge is how do you make yourself legally in Canada? So let's start with yourself. You're a migrant too, and you decided to pursue a career in immigration consulting. So what led you to that?
That is true. So I was originally born in Germany, and I always wanted to become a lawyer. That was kind of my passion. I did several internships in the legal field and wanted to learn more about it. But I knew I would come to Canada eventually at a certain point in my life because of my husband. And so the question arose, well, what could I do in Canada? And I discovered that niche of immigration law, which was really fascinating for me because it was a journey that I then went through myself. And so I decided to do my immigration practitioner diploma in Vancouver, and then immigrated, took on the whole journey and experienced the challenges that come with that move. And then had the opportunity to take over ProCanada Consulting, which has been around for more than 25 years, especially helping clients right from outside Canada to come to Canada. And that is what I now do and am passionate about, and help clients advise on their visa strategy.
Excellent. It's always good to have someone who is helping you on the immigration journey, who actually has went through the immigration journey themselves, to understand not just the legal side of things, but also the human side of things, as well, how it's not that easy. But what would you say would be the biggest misunderstanding about the Canadian immigration process that you typically face when dealing with some of the people that come to you?
That is a very good question, and I think there are a lot of misunderstandings that you can see. So first one being clients copy the immigration story of other individuals, right? Because they think, oh, my friend did this and it worked. Or they say, oh, I talked to this person, I saw this on social media and this was their pathway. So they feel like they know how it's done. But in the end, you need to understand every client is different, right? Every situation is different. So it's important to really analyze what are the eligibility criteria that you need to focus on. And so you shouldn't copy and paste another one's immigration story. I would say that is one part. And then the other one, which we really see more and more here in Canada, is also the development of AI and the implementation of AI in the immigration system. People use AI to write their own explanation letters, right? And they feel if they want to put in their entire life story, that should convince the officer, not knowing that with an explanation letter, the idea is that you focus the officer, like who's reviewing the case and the application, on very specific details that you maybe want to highlight, and they don't take the time to read like kind of the entire life story or read like 4 to 5 pages. They want it really condensed and in detail. So I would say that is another misunderstanding, that thinking AI can solve your immigration kind of case or help you with the application. Because like an immigration application is not just about filling out forms. It's about so much more than that. It's about building the whole strategy that leads you in the end to Canada and allows you to stay long term. I would say is the second misunderstanding. And the third is definitely that if you come to Canada or if you submit your application and your application is in process, and there are questions about your case, and the officer asks you to provide more supporting detail, for example, that then individuals submit that information themselves. And that should already be an indicator that the case might become complex or that there might be more questions coming up. So I would say this is then also where it would be really advisable to seek professional help if those questions arise, and not try to figure out those questions on your own.
So what you mean is those questions, it's an additional due diligence process, and because of that, there are certain triggers that you need to avoid, not to make a mistake of not getting your case denied. So that's why you say to hire someone who can help you out identifying those.
Exactly, because if once though you experience those triggers, or right, those triggers are kind of applied to your case, they are like in the case system notes. And so then it becomes more difficult for kind of the next person trying to help you be like, okay, the way that person framed it was actually not correct, or wasn't kind of the way the reality was. Actually, it was this way, right? And it becomes harder and harder if you have the more you add to the so-called story, or like to the narrative of an application, because it's harder to rectify what was already said.
Oh, thank you so much for watching the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time from your busy schedule to be with us today. And I would like to take this quick moment to say thank you to all the people who are helping me out. Sergey with the visuals, Angelica with the social media marketing, and Intrinsic Innovation for providing us with this beautiful space. All the necessary links are in the comments below. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow, so please spread the love. And I highly encourage you to watch the episode until the end, because there's more interesting things that we'll be sharing today. Thank you. And going back to your earlier point about writing the story, because you mentioned that you don't have to write a 4 or 5 page story, and AI can maybe overflow with information and not provide what people are really looking for. What would you say are the things that you see typically what the immigration officer is looking for in that story? What kind of nuances they need to take into account?
Very good question. So of course depends on the case, but I recently had a case where a certain time frame was really important. So then the recommendation would be just focus on that time frame, let's say maybe the past 5 years. Don't include the previous, don't explain the history of, for example, 10 years, if it's not relevant to the case, right? Because that is where you need to prove something, and that is what you then want to focus on, that specific time frame. That is one example. The other one is also with kind of coherence with the documents you submit and the information the additional supporting documents you submit and the information that you put into the forms. Make sure that those are really aligned, because most often the forms are already processed by machines, right? So they already detect if there's for example, incoherence in the dates. If, for example, within the work history, there's a break of 2 months or 3 months and you didn't record it as, let's say, for example, unemployed or looking for work, that then already triggers the system to be the officer sees that the system has triggered that. And that is where you then really want to make sure that you clearly follow the guidelines that are provided in the immigration forms and fill out kind of, in that case, the timeline correctly.
I see. And actually, you mentioned a good point, because you're providing generic kind of advice. I want to say something to the camera, is that this is a conversation about generic advice. Immigration journeys can differ depending on your situation, and it's always good not just to take everything at face value, but to use the help of a real advisor, like Alexandra here. Her links will be down below as well, but I would just want to say that this is a generic conversation, so your case may be a little bit different than what we're discussing here. But going back, one thing we discussed offline is that immigration, especially if you're thinking about immigrating to Canada, you have to have a strategy. So let's talk a little bit about what does that mean in practice for someone who is thinking about moving to Canada.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, because strategy is a key component, right? If you only think about immigrating to Canada as, okay, this is the first visa I want to apply for, and you don't think further, that can have a big impact. So it can be that a person starts with one visa and that is the journey they want to go through. But in that time frame, for example, let's say language knowledge improves. Let's take French, because French is kind of a door entry to Canadian immigration. And the French knowledge improves. So it's then important to be like, okay, the first step and idea was to focus on entrepreneur immigration, but with the new French knowledge, other doors open, and we should pursue those pathways as well, because they maybe help you to become a permanent resident earlier than with the original plan. And that is where I think it's really important, of course, within the laws and the regulations of the Canadian immigration, but to be adaptive when it comes to the strategy and have that long-term plan and vision and what your goal is. And so this is what we do at ProCanada, what we call personal immigration strategy. We first have a meeting to really understand what is the situation of the client, what are the eligibility criteria, what is the goal, when do they want to be here, do they want to be here with family, are they okay to go first, are they looking for employment, are they looking for entrepreneurial aspects, where in Canada do they want to go, because we have the federal immigration programs, but then each province has their own immigration programs. And that is where, in our opinion, it's really helpful to have that strategic mindset, and we see us as the guides who take the client through that entire journey and guide them by the hand, so that then in the end they will achieve their long-term goal. And so this is where we have Immigration Solutions, which is the division I lead with ProCanada as a regulated Canadian immigration consultant, helping with mainly the economic programs, so whether that's the point system or it's the entrepreneurial programs, as well as the temporary work permits and family reunification. So if a person is already a Canadian or permanent resident in Canada and they want to bring parents or grandparents, or even like they meet someone somewhere else and they develop into a genuine relationship, sponsor that person. That is the one part. And the second part, or the second division within ProCanada, is soft landing solutions. And that is led by my husband, Alexander, who is originally also from Germany, but has moved between Canada and Germany already 5 times. So he really has a knowledge of what the hurdles and challenges are whenever you get back into the system. And he guides our clients from the practical perspective. So that means either it can be real estate support, it can be helping with setting up the business or trying to identify a business that you can purchase, or also the more general life aspects. For example, supporting with the school system or which school might be right for the children, and helping with selecting a neighborhood that
so many layers
would work. Yeah. Or is another layer, right? Kind of considering what aspects, what documents do you want to bring from your home country, because they will be harder to get and obtain once you're here in Canada.
Oh yeah, kind of prepare in advance so that you don't need to travel back because in some countries you can get things online easily, and some it's a little bit more difficult.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what happens if, let's say, you have a strategy and you're working with, let's say, someone is planning to move here with an entrepreneur mindset, but programs evolve. How do you adapt to an evolving program? Because this is something I saw happen quite often, especially in the last couple of years, where there were certain streams and then either they were closed or they were changed or something else happened within them. How do you work around adapting your immigration strategy towards an ever-changing legal environment?
That is definitely necessary to do. And the way we do it is to be in constant communication with our client to understand what changes on their life side or their life aspects, but then also, of course, be up to date on what are the current immigration changes and what may be alternatives open. And I think one important part to consider is in an immigration program, once you are, let's say, for example, invited to apply, it's quite normal that you will kind of be assessed under the previous eligibility criteria and that the new ones won't apply. But of course, this is only if once you've received, let's say, an invitation to apply, or you are kind of in that system, so to speak. So sometimes, of course, it can happen that individuals say, well, like, give me some time, I need to reconsider and kind of assess what happens, or like what I would want to do. And then we are here to guide them, or sometimes we have a meeting and we discuss the options and clearly lay out the risks, because I feel like that is also a task that I have, right? To really explain to them what risks a certain pathway has versus another. And then we guide them through that entire decision process.
So what kind of risks do you typically see?
So one risk can, for example, be, let's say the client is here already with a work permit and their employer supported them with that work permit. So that means the employer submitted a so-called labor market impact assessment. So they needed to prove that there was no Canadian that could do the job in order for the foreign person to be able to apply for that position or obtain that work permit. And so it might be that the processing times on the employer's application side have been prolonged, right? So they take more time than we initially anticipated. And that could then have an implication for the individual who is here with a work permit. And let's say their current work permit expires, the new work permit needs to be submitted before the old work permit before the current work permit expires. And so that could then create a conflict regarding the timeline, because the work permit processing might be quicker than the processing for the employer's application process. And that could then lead to a time conflict where the client's work permit is being assessed, but the employer's decision is not there yet, and it could then be denied because of the fact that the employer's process has not been finished yet. So then the client could end up with a denied work permit. But the benefit could be that the work permit, the applicant holder could continue working here in Canada until a decision is made, right? So those are then the kind of decisions that need to be made, whether do I want to go outside and stay in, for example, apply from outside Canada, because then I just wait until the employer's labor market impact decision is made, or it's so important to me, or I financially need to remain employed, so I decide to do the application process from inside Canada, but be aware that there might be that risk. So those are that is a very specific example, right?
But I like it because it really showcases that you can be here, you might have a work visa temporarily, but then it's not all up to your personal application, it's also up to the other parts, which is not an immigration side of things, but it's a labor related part, but still it can influence your own status here negatively in case of a denial on that side.
I agree, and I think that is one main component that really shows how stressful immigration can be as well, or what kind of the challenges are through an immigration process, that you're so reliant on another party, right? You are reliant, for example, on an approval process from your employer, but you're also reliant on the processing times from the government, and they can vary and they can change significantly, and that has implications.
So you mentioned also that sometimes you can be outside the country to apply to become a resident here, let's say from a work permit, because myself, I got a PR online through the platform, and that really works out when you have all your documents in place. But let's say there's a from a work-related situation, because I have had people to reach out to me and say, hey, I'm applying to jobs in Canada, but no one is replying. Do you see a lot of those instances of people getting a job while being outside of Canada than to utilize a work permit to come here? Is that a scenario that's oftenly seen?
I do see it quite often. I think it also depends, or it is definitely dependent on the citizenship of the individual, right? Because and there are the eligibility requirements, age, for example. So there are pathways that you can choose within the Canadian immigration system that are, for example, exempt from the labor market impact assessment we just talked about. And so then that makes it easier for the employer here to issue or to offer that job offer if they understand that person can come to Canada without them as the employer needing to go through that process. So then in those kind of scenarios, if their applicant is eligible for that, that is an option. I do see that. But we are all aware and we know that kind of the job offer situation is challenging in Canada, and it's challenging for a person who comes from outside Canada to get a job offer here. I've seen it. It happens, and I find oftentimes helpful for the applicant to have to either get a warm introduction or already know the employer from maybe a previous work relationship, right? To have that really, as I said, warm introduction and kind of personal connection.
So even here, networking is important from that perspective.
Definitely, yeah.
But I like that, that you're putting everything back to the strategy piece, because going and applying to different positions and hoping that, the stars will align in such a way that someone will invite you and work on your behalf. Like that is like the probability is very low. But as long as you have a strategy and you know what you're doing and you understand kind of the permits and the labor requirements and the work permit requirements and all that, you can actually have a thorough conversation with a potential employer, even if they're not your close acquaintance or whatnot. Excellent. But let's say kind of an immigration process itself. What kind of challenges, maybe from not just the legal side, but also from emotional side of things? Because you mentioned, like, for example, Alexander, he travels back and forth a lot and he has seen that. What kind of things you see newcomers face on your end?
I would say there are definitely a few challenges, and I personally would say that loneliness or getting the feeling of integration is the most challenging one. And I say that from also the perspective that I feel, on the one hand, once you are here, right, and maybe you have your job, you have your visa, and it can even be that you are already a citizen. And sometimes you become a citizen after, let's say, 3 years, right? If you come as a permanent resident, potentially you would then become a citizen. So I would say the status itself you shouldn't think that once you are a permanent resident or once I'm a Canadian citizen, I feel Canadian. I feel like I'm a part of Canada. Yes, on a certain level you are, but I would say on the emotional level, still maybe after 3 or 5 years, it can feel like you're traveling back to your home country and there are aspects where you no longer can relate to, or you're kind of different than the others who've stayed there because life there moves on as well. Then you come back to Canada, you're kind of sitting and chatting with your Canadian friends, and maybe they come up with a joke or history or like movie that it's very common to watch when you're a child here in Canada, but you haven't. And so you can't speak about that, and you're not part of, not feeling like you belong there in that specific situation. And I find that is the biggest challenge and like newcomers can face. And I always say it feels like you lose your North Star, kind of you lose your inner compass. And it takes time and resilience to find that again and to build on that. But once you come out of it, I feel newcomers or people generally who have kind of different nationalities or like who have a context, who have lived in different places in the world, are more complex personas. So they are really interesting, with their perspectives. And I find that being able to take on different perspectives because you have lived in other countries, because you've really spent time there, you've got to know the culture and the customs, right? Like you are aware what it means like to live in Canada, you're aware what it means like to live in your home country. And because you're able to take on those different perspectives, I find you bring so much you can bring so much to the table. And that is where I think through that challenge, newcomers can really become very interesting personalities and a great addition to the
become like
population.
A bridge. There's also a song back home. If you translate it literally, the song goes as, "I'm a foreigner everywhere I go, although I'm one with their own. I feel like I'm one with their own." And that's exactly how it feels sometimes. It's like, you travel back home, maybe the humor is not there, maybe there's some other nuances, but then again, here you're also not integrated because you didn't grow up with people, didn't go to the same schools and the same universities. Yeah. But when we're talking about going back to the immigration pathways, of course, you have to prepare before you arrive to Canada. And you already mentioned that you need to understand, for example, what documents should I take with myself, not to then have to go and find a way to get those documents back home. What other ways would you suggest a person should prepare before they immigrate? Like, what things do you think they should really take into account to make sure that their settlement here is a success?
I think there's a multitude of aspects that you can take into consideration, and it definitely depends on whether you are coming with your family and kids or if it's just you on your own. I think that, of course, is already a big differentiation. And there is like the aspect on, for example, finding it like exploring the neighborhoods, right? Like getting a feel for which part of the city do you like. Also exploring, I would say, different provinces throughout Canada, because as I said, the provincial nominee programs are so different. So there are other opportunities, whether you go to the east or whether you want to go to, let's say, Calgary, or if you're even open to more rural areas. And that really makes a difference on what you should prepare. In addition to documents, I think the biggest part in that is kind of a little bit to what we already talked about, is the emotional preparedness. Like being aware that things can change and that for a certain period of your life, you will be dependent on processing times or like on the outcome from another, from a government that decides if you can fulfill your dream of coming to Canada.
So you have to be prepared to lose control over your own destiny, essentially.
Yeah, and be able to, be resilient, pragmatic, and also be in a position and mindset to be aware that change might happen, and that could also be part, like what your children might need to go through.
Yeah, and this is actually was my next question: the children. Because I'm not going to the psychological side of things, but when we're talking immigration with children, let's say from a perspective of getting the right documents in place and perspective of approvals, is it easier to get approval if you have kids, or is it more difficult, or does it not really matter?
It is not easier just because you have kids. There is no we need to differentiate. Is it the applicant from outside Canada having kids and they just want to move as a family, or is it you have kids and the kids are already adults and they have their status here in Canada and they want to bring parents or grandparents, right? That where we need to differentiate.
So let's talk about the first part. So you are outside, you have kids.
Yeah.
In comparison to, again, you're outside and you don't have kids.
Then I would say what I've observed so far is kids are very adaptable. And sometimes I hear parents, they are worried about for example, level of English of their children, and they fear that the children won't be able to speak well enough English to communicate with others in their school. And so that is where I say, you shouldn't worry too much. The children will adapt really well to their natural environment in school. It might take a little bit of time, but in the end, right, we all know that languages are easier learned once if you're still young and you learn the language at a young age. At the same time, I think if you are a parent who wants to still share your own culture and traditions with your kid and you don't want them to lose it, because I also know that from Alexander, right, when he was little, and his dad still wanted to talk in German with him, and he was very resistant to that, and he didn't. His dad was talked to him in German, but Alexander responded in English because he didn't want to speak German anymore. But if you still want your child to have that knowledge and maybe be able to speak with the grandparents, then I think using the opportunities that the culture, cultural associations offer, where it's kind of play dates with other, in our case, then German kids, or in kind of maybe cultural associations that do share also the tradition, and there are opportunities for the kids to get involved there. I think that helps if this is your goal. And
but going back to the immigration side, let's say some people, they think that if they have a kid here, it will help them with the rest of the statuses, or maybe they're already here and they are on the work permit and they have a kid who is by right of birth can become a Canadian citizen.
Okay.
Or they come specifically to have birth here so that then the kid will have a status. Would that help the immigration journey?
So you're right that if you are born in Canada, we have like the right of birth. So then the child is a Canadian citizen. But that does not automatically mean that the parents are Canadian citizens as well, or that they have an easier pathway to apply for Canadian citizenship as long as the child is still a minor. So only once the child is an adult and has also proof of their tax records and that they have enough money to support their parents, then they can help their parents and sponsor them for permanent residency. But so that is a huge misconception that if you give, or like if a child is born here in Canada, that at that young age it can, or like as a newborn, it can already help the parents move here. And it's also not like they won't qualify for a work permit or a temporary visa more easily just because they have the child here. The child needs to live where the parents have their legal status as well.
I see. So yeah, so basically, if the parents don't get an extension on the work permit or the PR is cancelled for some reason, even though they have a kid who is a Canadian citizen, they will still have to leave the country essentially. And like I want to talk about trends as well in terms of immigration. Of course, like the systems change, and you also mentioned that don't just use AI to write your 4 or 5 page essays. What in terms of trends and what kind of trends should newcomers look into? Like, what do you see maybe with some changes in technology, or maybe in terms of where Canada is right now in terms of the immigration policies? What do you see any trends?
I think one aspect that is great about the Canadian immigration system is that it changes and adapts to what is needed in the Canadian economy. Of course, right, there are differences whether you talk with the policymakers or you talk with the companies and businesses themselves. But nonetheless, I find it's a great tool that the Canadian immigration system has, that they adapt their kind of focus categories or specific categories. So we see that it can happen anytime, but it just happened recently that there were more categories added and that they were not relevant before. The other aspect is that if you are open to move to a more rural area, I think that is a trend we see, that there are more opportunities and there are pathways that allow you to get hired more quickly, and that would even then allow you to apply for a direct pathway to permanent residency. But they are job offer based, but they are in rural areas. So if a person is open to more rural areas, I think that is an opportunity, and that is a trend newcomers should be mindful of. The other one I see is French. We all know, right, Canada is a Francophone country, so Canada wants to focus and so have more opportunities for individuals who want to move outside of Quebec and have a certain level of French. And if you are able to prove that level of French, those are trends I see as well. It's in the rural areas, but it's also in the specific kind of focus categories in the point system. Those, I think, are the trends within the immigration system, kind of from a program perspective. And then the other trend is definitely, and I think that will be really interesting to observe how AI shapes and changes the Canadian immigration system, because already now we see that AI is implemented, right? That there are kind of those automatic systems, and that maybe a work permit automatically gets reviewed at a certain point in time because the system triggers it, or that officers, because they get so much applications, and for some applications there's quite the backlog and the processing times are really long. They need to rely on AI to help them make decisions, and I think that will be a really interesting balance to strike, and will be interesting to see how that develops in the immigration system.
I see. And I also want to talk about red flags, because I have acquaintances who have had some interesting experiences with immigration consultants, where some of them would be, how to put it diplomatically, offer things that should not be offered to the people they're consulting, or someone would take the money and then not reply for weeks, and so on and so forth. So, as an expert in the field, what would be the biggest triggers that you see from a consulting promising or doing something, or even asking the questions that someone who's listening to the podcast can say, hey, if you see these things, run away from that person?
Very good question and very important topic. So thank you for raising that. Immigration consultants, if they have the license, they are licensed by the College of Immigration and Citizenship Consultants. And each immigration consultant has a specific license number. And on the website from the college, you can enter the license number. You can also enter the name of the firm, and it will show you if they have an active license. You will even see if there were any claims made against them or any proceedings against them.
Oh, wow.
So the job as an immigration consultant is very highly regulated. Every year, you need to renew your license to remain an active member. And for that, you need to prove that you fulfill a certain hour of continued professional development courses to show that you're well-versed in the topics. The college collects the information on, or like the data on how many applications you submitted in which area, which then also, right, is a proof of are the continued professional development courses you do related to the applications you submit. And you're absolutely right that there are a lot of ghost consultants, is what they are called. And the reason why the regulations are now so strict and why the college has also undergone different processes. So, for example, now it's only you can only do the degree in one specific college on the East Coast. You can no longer do it in colleges across Canada. That is why they are so strict and why they are very strict, and they have a lot of regulations when it comes to how the service agreements need to be written, when you need to provide an initial consultation agreement, all those aspects. So red flags would definitely be if you can't find the license number anywhere published. Second red flag, if there are any entries to the license number or to the name.
Like negative entries.
Negative entries, on the college website.
And sorry, how do you find the college website again? Just so that everyone can find it.
That is a very good question. Maybe we can put that in the links as well. It's probably cicc.ca, but I would need to double check. But if you Google College of Immigration and Citizenship Consultants, and that is where like the CICC stands for, you will find it. It's red and white kind of logo. So those are like the red flags. And then the other aspect is definitely also be mindful. Immigration consultants can work with what are called agents, but they need to register the agents. And so an agent could be a person who is definitely outside of Canada, in the home country of the person, but they are only eligible to collect, for example, information and documents. They are not eligible to give advice. And sometimes they give advice, right? And so that is then where it's also the ask to the person who experiences any kind of fraud situation with regards to immigration to Canada to report them to the college. So you can submit a report that person took your money or like they give you advice, but you couldn't find them on the website, or they took your money, but they no longer respond to you. I think those are definitely more red flags. And then another one, which is something I can't talk too much about, but some even say like they prefer to pay in Canadian dollars instead of US dollars.
But it's a good point that you mentioned, do put it into the college system in case you feel defrauded, so that other people will not face the same issue.
Definitely.
And lastly, kind of what I want to ask you is more about piece of wisdom. So to finish our episode, what would be one piece of wisdom, maybe on your experience, that you would like to share with our audience?
I think one piece of wisdom would definitely be to be prepared, take your time, and have a strategic plan that you want to follow, and be aware that changes might happen, and be adaptable through that whole process.
Excellent. That's a good thing, good way to finish this episode. Thank you so much. You shared a lot of valuable information with our viewers. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Samir, for having me.
Thank you for coming.